possibly responsible for 12 attacks and 6 killings.
Charms for lurking within its shadowed alleys and behind its shuttered doors once prowled a most dreadful fiend property. But this wasn't the only weapon in his arm. 5 days later, on the night of August the 10th, a name was added to their grim ledger, that of Joseph Romano, an elderly gentleman also of Italian descent. And in the bloom of pregnancy, retired to her bed, ignorant of the horror that crept through the night. The intruder, as before, found access to the home through means unseen, setting upon the poor lady with merciless force. By the bedside to bludgeon their victim, detectives believed this was the work of the axe murderer.
This case is famous for its brutality and has similarities to another famous unsolved American murder from 2012. This is the case of the Axeman of New Orleans. On March 13, 1918, in the early hours of the morning, a woman screamed for help from inside her home. Her name was Catherine Doff, and she lived with her son, Joseph, at 2417 Burgundy Street in New Orleans. Their house was a small double shotgun house, meaning it had separate apartments side by side. One was rented out to a single man named George Merrick, and the other was where Catherine and her son lived. The houses in this part of New Orleans were notorious for being flimsy, with walls made of only wooden boards and corrugated tin roofs. So when Catherine started screaming, people in the neighboring homes could easily hear her. A neighbor named Murray Wiltz went over to see what happened and saw George's front door had been kicked in and there was blood everywhere. She found George lying face down on the floor in his underwear. He had a deep gash on the top of his head and he was still breathing but unconscious. Murray ran back to her own house and called the police. When they arrived, George was dead. A doctor said he had been hit on the head with an axe. As the police investigated, they learned that George had recently had an argument with Catherine. She had asked him to move out because he hadn't paid his rent in 3 months. But this didn't seem like enough of a motive for murder, especially since George had been attacked in his sleep. It seemed senseless. Then the police got a call from a hospital, saying a man had just walked in claiming to be George Merrick. The police went to the hospital and realized it wasn't him. It was actually Joseph Doff, Catherine's son. He had severe injuries to his head and face. Doctors operated on him, but he died the next day. When the police questioned Catherine, she told them she had nothing to do with their deaths. But she admitted that she and George had argued. She said that around midnight, she heard someone kick in the front door, and then she heard screams coming from George's apartment. She said she looked out her window and saw a black man standing over George's body. He was holding an axe covered in blood. The man turned towards her, and she swore she would never forget the look on his face. He had a red handkerchief tied around his head like a turban, and he raised the axe as if he was going to throw it at her. Then he just walked away. Catherine called out to him, "You're a murderer," and he replied, "I am going to kill you now." That's when she started screaming for help. Catherine was so credible, and the case was so heinous, that everyone in New Orleans believed her story. People started looking for the man with the red handkerchief, but no one had seen him since. It became one of the most talked about cases in the country. Newspapers from all over America picked up the story. In April, the police got another call. A man had walked into a different hospital covered in blood and said he had been attacked. His name was Anthony LaCroix, and he also had a severe wound on the top of his head. He survived. When the police questioned him, he gave a statement that was almost exactly the same as Catherine's. He had been at home sleeping when he heard someone kicking in his front door. He opened his eyes and saw a man with a red handkerchief wrapped around his head standing over him with an axe. The man swung the axe at him several times, and then Anthony managed to grab the axe and wrestle it away from him. They struggled until the man with the axe broke free and ran off. Anthony said the man was anywhere between 5'6" and 5'10". He had a dark complexion, a medium build, curly hair, and he was wearing overalls. Police started searching the city for men matching the description, but no one was ever found. Everyone assumed the Axeman was behind all 3 attacks, but not everyone believed the victims' stories. Some people thought Anthony and Joseph had killed George in order to steal his money, and then they made up the story about the Axeman to cover up their crime. But there was no evidence for this. There was no sign of robbery. In May, Anthony LaCroix identified Joseph's body at the morgue, confirming that the attack on him happened just like he described. In June, Catherine Doff was found not guilty of any wrongdoing at a coroner's inquest. But these events weren't over yet. In August, a fourth person was attacked. This time, it was a woman named Hilda Arbuthnot. She lived at 1631 Burgundy Street, just 5 blocks from where the other attacks happened. At 2 o'clock in the morning, she was awakened by someone kicking in her front door. She looked out her window and saw a tall, slim man running away. The man was carrying an axe and a lantern. He stopped and looked back at her house and shouted, "Come out, come out. I know you're in there." Hilda called the police, but when they arrived, they found no trace of the killer or any sign that he had entered the house. In September, there was a 5th attack. This time it was a man named Charles Connerly. He lived alone in a small house at 1520 North Rampart Street. In the middle of the night, he was awoken by someone chopping wood outside. He looked out his window and saw a tall, slender man in overalls chopping up a piece of wood into kindling. Charles shut the window and went back to bed, but then he heard someone kick in his front door. He grabbed his gun and fired at the intruder. The man ran off. Charles stepped outside and found a large axe on the ground, but the man was gone. Everyone in New Orleans was terrified. They began calling the man the Axeman of New Orleans. People bought axes and guns for protection. Others moved out of the city. The police offered a reward of $5,000 for information in the case, the equivalent of about $100,000 today. They even enlisted the help of a clairvoyant, but she couldn't help them. She said, "There are too many psychics and mediums in New Orleans. People go to them to get their fortunes told, and they tell them what they want to hear. That's why none of them can tell you anything about the Axeman." To this day, nobody knows who the Axeman was or why he did what he did. There was never another attack, and in 1919, the case went cold. Now, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this case is similar to another famous unsolved American murder, the Beaumont children's case from 2012. In that case, a mother and her 2 young children were found brutally murdered in their home in suburban Philadelphia. The police have never caught the killer, and they believe an axe was used in the crime. You can watch the full video about the Beaumont case here. So let me ask you, what do you think happened in the Axeman of New Orleans case? Do you think all of the attacks were committed by the same person? Or do you think there were multiple attackers? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. And you can also check out my podcast. I will see you next time.